Welcome everybody to this is the first talk of the virtual track, and as Nico has very kindly introduced me there, I'm a SANS instructor. I teach Sec 497 Practical Open Source Intelligence, which is our new OSINT course that launched last year. And one of the biggest asks I found from clients in my day job and also from students I teach at SANS is there's a huge demand for information and techniques, knowledge for working on the Russian internet, Russian social media platforms. How do you create Russian sock puppets? What are some of the useful resources and so on? So what we're going to do in this session here is give you some practical guidance that you can, if you're working in this area or you want to improve your skills and knowledge in around Russian OSINT. This talk's going to be great for you because we're going to go straight into some useful practical techniques for getting started in the Russian internet. And although it's Friday today, these are all techniques you can take away and you'll be ready to implement them in your work on Monday. So let's get started. So here we go. So I will, sorry, excuse me one second. I'll just introduce myself very briefly. I won't bore you with my entire life story, of course, but what I'm not teaching at SANS, I'm a cyber threat analyst, and I work for a company based in the UK called Protection Group International, PGI, and I work very closely day to day in the information space, looking at information operations, looking at cybersecurity threats and so on, which of course means spending an awful lot of time in the Russian internet environment and trying to understand what's going on there. My background prior to that was in law enforcement. I was a detective for about 12 years here in the UK, specializing in cybercrime. So I've had cause to spend an awful lot of time identifying Russian operations, unmasking them, and seeing how they all work together. So I'm going to bring some of that experience to you now. So what we're going to cover in the next half hour or so, we're going to do is talk in three sections. First of all, we're going to look at OPSEC considerations when we're working on the Russian internet, and you'll see that if you're used to only working on the Western internet in North America or in Europe, for example, there are some additional considerations that we don't have in the West, and we'll talk about those and some challenges and also some workarounds for them. Then we will look very briefly at some of the key Russian platforms and some tools that will help you get started and scaling up your research on some of those platforms. And then finally, we have a small section at the end where we'll just look at the cybercrime environment and what we call grey data, sort of hacked, leaked data, and how that applies particularly to Russia. So this is what we're going to get through. And of course, if you have any questions, there'll be time for questions at the end. Just drop them into the Slack, and we'll pick them up at the end if there's anything that you want to share or discuss. I will mention, by the way, that I am going to share with you at the end a GitHub repository which has links to all of the resources and some others that I'm going to mention in this talk. So if I mention a resource or a website and you don't grab the URL or don't manage to capture the screen or whatever you're doing, don't worry, I'll share a link with you at the end which contains a list for all the resources in this talk. So let's get started. And we'll talk a little bit about OPSEC considerations first of all. OPSEC is one of my favorite topics, and it's usually a matter of fierce debate in open source intelligence as to how much OPSEC we need to apply, what we need to worry about, what techniques work and what don't, and so on and so on. I will say this to you, if you're considering, well, OSINT in general, but if you're considering doing OSINT in the Russian environment, and that is you must make some kind of OPSEC consideration, have some kind of operational security plan at the start of your research. Now, unfortunately, I can't tell you what that is. And the reason for that is that your OPSEC risks are very much dependent on what your operations are. All OPSEC is really is a kind of risk management to protect your organization, to protect yourself, to protect your operations from being exposed or harmed or disrupted in some way. So let's say I'm an investigative journalist, or I'm just wanting to join a Russian social media platform to see what people in St. Petersburg say, what do they think about mobilization? Or maybe I want to look through the Russian news or Russian court records to find which are they prosecuting any cyber criminals that would be of interest to me and so on. For that kind of low engagement, largely passive kind of research, the OPSEC risks to you are relatively small, because if you were discovered and your sock puppet account was compromised, for example, that the impact on you is likely to not be too big. On the other hand, if I were working for law enforcement or some kind of intelligence agency, and I was wanting to look for people who work in the Russian government, perhaps who might provide me with human intelligence, or I might want to build a relationship with, and I use OSINT to scope that, the risks are much, much greater. So I need to adjust my OPSEC considerations in order to take that into account. So the right level of OPSEC to apply is a decision for you and your organization to make, depending on the kind of risk that you're exposed to. So you need to plan that out at the start, but the exact level of risk that you need to factor in very much depends on what your operation is, what it is that you care about, and what it is that you are trying to protect. So we'll cover some basic OPSEC techniques, which we need to factor in for Russia. And we'll also look at how we can build effective sock puppets in the Russian environment as well. So let's start with the basics. VPN, virtual private networks. They are a core tool for open source intelligence investigators. And the reason is they do two important things for us. The first thing is that they disguise our true IP address when we connect to the internet. So we don't, if we're working in our office or working from home, we don't expose our organizations or our home's true IP address. So we can disguise our IP address, which is very useful. And also, just as important in this environment is that the VPN also allows us to protect our presence. So it allows us to appear to be coming from a country that we don't necessarily originate from. Very, very important when we are working or wanting to access resources in Russia. And that is because, and this is the first real operational challenge, the Russian internet is not a mirror of the Western internet. It is much more heavily censored. It is much more, there's far more state control. The Russians have a federal communications agency called Roskomnadzor. I hope I pronounced that correctly. But they actively target Western VPN servers to try and identify them so that people in Russia can't use them. So IP ranges used by VPN providers that work in the West, you may find that you are unable to access Russian resources because of them. And for any organization that wants to set up VPN operations or VPN servers in Russia, they can be required by the Russian state to provide access to logs, to traffic, things like that. So there are certain risks involved when it comes to accessing the internet in Russia. And finding, as I found, and I know others have found, finding a good VPN that works every single time for connecting to Russia can be quite difficult, because you're constantly playing this cat and mouse game with the Russian authorities. Some that I found work, Proton VPN is my go-to for working with the Russian internet. On the paid tier of Proton VPN, you get a wide range of servers from many, many different countries that you can choose to make connection from. And importantly, they are rotated very often as well. So even if an IP address gets blocked, Proton are fairly quick to put new ones in. ExpressVPN, another provider who have had some success. But the problem with even with Proton VPN and ExpressVPN is that you're always sharing that VPN endpoint with someone else. And if the Russian authorities, for example, are willing to invest enough time and effort, it's relatively easy to find out which VPN endpoints these providers are using, and you can find them get blocked. So a different approach that I'm going to suggest to you, depending on the level of effort and your goals and so on, is to use a piece of software called Algo, which allows you to create your own VPN that only you use and you manage, and you're much less likely to get picked up by the Russian authorities if you do that, because you will stand out as a VPN much, much less. So Algo, essentially, it's a script that you install on a Linux server of your choice. Follow the steps in the script. and it will produce a VPN configuration for you, and you can run that on a server anywhere in the world, which allows you to have your own private VPN from anywhere else in the world, which can work quite well for an environment like Russia. As you'll see, by the way, I'm going to start to do this now. Every time I identify an opportunity in the Russian internet, there's going to be a counter challenge as well. So here's one of our first ones, which is that Russia actively seeks to block connections to many of its services that don't originate within Russia. So it's no good me here in the UK or in North America, for example, to just use Algo VPN, because if they start geo-blocking, and then that might thwart me. So there are a couple of Russian hosting companies that offer Linux VPSs that you can install Algo VPN on and run your own VPNs. These come with their own risks, as you'll see. So the first one is ihor.online. They allow you to, they have servers in many countries, but they do have VPSs based within Russia that you could install your VPN software on or use as a proxy to connect to Russian services. That's one kind of thing you can do. The other provider is an organization called hostry.com or hostry.com. They are based in Russia, I think, but they offer services in lots of Russia-friendly countries that border Russia itself, like Kazakhstan, and you can create VPSs on servers there and access Russian services a little bit more easily. Both of these providers, you'll notice in the graphics there, they accept payment by cryptocurrencies. As we'll see in a moment, you'll need to pay sometimes to access some services in Russia, which has its own problems, but we'll address that in a moment. But both these providers accept cryptocurrency as a means of payment. So even if we can connect to the internet in Russia itself, we need to still think about some of the basics, like how do I get on social media platforms? How do I interact with different services? And one of the core things, one of the most basic things that we always need to do is to create our own sock puppets. And sock puppet creation, again, is widely discussed. It's a really interesting topic, and just as creating sock puppets in the Western internet, there's no one magic solution. But I will say this, and I'll show you how this works in a moment or two. The barrier to getting onto the internet in Russia, and by which I mean getting onto their platforms and so on, the barrier is a little bit higher at the start. However, once you are on there, once you've got your VK account or your mail.ru account set up and so on, generally staying on there is a little bit easier. So if you've ever tried to create a sock puppet on Facebook or create one on LinkedIn, you'll know that even if you're successful at creating one, it can actually be very, very difficult to stay on there for a very long time, because both Facebook and LinkedIn and other companies spend a lot of money and resources trying to remove fake accounts from their platform. I generally have not found that to be the case, or certainly not to the same extent within Russia. So if you can get through that barrier of actually creating the accounts in the first place, persisting on the platforms does seem to be a little bit easier. So there's a little bit of a trade-off thing there. The golden rule for creating accounts on the Russian internet is that you would need a mobile phone number that has to be able to receive SMS messages, or it has to be able to receive a phone call as well. And there are reasons for that. The main reason for that is most of the Russian platforms require some kind of validation when you sign up. And when I created my last round of Russian sock puppets, which was around about Christmas time, when I signed up, I'd go and put in my email address and my phone number and so on that I was using, and you get a silent call from the provider. It will just pop up on your phone, it will ring and then close off again. You are asked to enter the last 5-6 digits of whatever that phone number was to prove that you own that device, to prove that you control that SIM card. So you can't just do this with an email address. You can't even just do it with some kind of SMS service. You need to have ideally a physical device that is capable of receiving a phone call to validate and get onto most of these platforms. Is that the right option for you? Only you can really answer that question depending on the sort of level of risk that you're willing to take on. Are you happy to use a Western phone number to create an account on VK? You can do that. I do that. But depending on your organization and the nature of your operations, that may not always be suitable. But remember, it only has to be good enough to get you on there. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so let's talk about, we're going to talk about 3 challenges to create for creating sock puppets. And I will give you some suggestions as to how you might deal with them. So the 2 core platforms for creating sock puppet accounts in Russia is mail.ru, which is for your email account, your basic email account, and VK, which is by far the largest social media platform. It's very similar to Facebook, but the advantage of a VK account is that absolutely everyone, not absolutely every service, but a very, very large number of services you want to access in Russia, you can sign in with your VK account. Just like here in the West, we can sign in with Google or sign in with Facebook. In Russia, you can sign in with VK, which means if we go through the hassle of creating a VK account at the start, that actually opens the door to lots and lots of other services. But you do need a phone number, as I mentioned before, because you need to be able to receive a call from a random number and then prove you knew what that number was in order to gain access. So currently, so the last time I created this was sort of December, January. You can still use a phone number from a Western country. Now, you used to be able to create sock puppets on VK using Gmail. That is no longer possible. As part of the deterioration in relationships between Russia and the West, those kind of services, Gmail, Facebook, are now blocked. You can't use Gmail to do this anymore. You need a phone number. So you can go to your local shop, depending on the country you're in, and purchase a SIM card, which you can put in an old handset, and then you can use that for your phone number to receive your call, which will then allow you onto that internet. Again, a trade-off for you. In a perfect world, you'd use a Russian phone number, but that's very, very difficult if you can't just pop around the corner and go and buy a Russian SIM card. It's much easier in the West to get hold of a Western SIM card, and for now at least, you can use Western phone numbers to create sock puppets on Russian platforms. Again, if that phone number were to be discovered and exposed and linked to your sock puppet, what would the fallout of that be for your organization? It may not be a problem at all. It may be, again, that's something that you have to factor in when you come to your OPSEC. So the second challenge / opportunity is if you're not willing or able to use a Western phone number on a SIM card, you can obtain Russian phone numbers. This definitely comes with some risks and limitations, but there are a couple of services which will do this for you. The first is one called Compeek. Compeek will provide virtual phone numbers for you. So if you want to be able to receive a call, you can use one of their virtual phone numbers to activate your account. They are based in Hong Kong, or at least their business is registered in Hong Kong. There is also SMS Man as well, which will allow you to purchase Russian phone numbers for receiving SMSs, for receiving calls on as well. SMS Man particularly are extremely shady. As soon as I went onto their website to begin researching, I get their chatbot pop up saying, "Hey, we'd love to deal with you if you've got any SIMs to sell," which gives you an idea of how they might source their SIM cards. So tread very, very carefully. Other thing to consider is if you want to pay for services in Russia, you cannot use your Western bank card, you cannot use your Western debit cards, PayPal to pay for these things. Because of the sanctions regime that now exists between the West and Russia, Western financial services, so not only your banks, not Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, Cash App, Venmo, all those sorts of services will not process payments from the West to Russia because it comes with legal risks for them and they don't want to take that on board. So although you could potentially purchase Russian phone numbers that way, there is a great risk to your bank accounts, to your reputation within banks and so on. if you want to do that. And I know fortunately, this was not my experience, but this was the painful experience of others. A really fast way to lose your PayPal account is to try and pay for something in Russia using that PayPal account. Western financial institutions are not interested in taking on the risk of transferring money to Russia. So this can be, although this looks on paper a very tempting opportunity, it does come with risks as well. And that brings us on to our third our third challenge when we're creating sock puppets, which is we might be able to create a better sock puppet if we are able to buy resources in Russia. But as I just mentioned, that's very, very difficult. But cryptocurrency, although officially, I couldn't believe this when I saw it because it just clashes with reality so much, but officially the use of cryptocurrency is not encouraged by the Russian government. But as you know, if you worked in cybercrime or CTI, things like that, it is used widely. It's the currency of the criminal underground. It's widely used for sanctions evasion, things like that. And it is possible to purchase a wide range of services in Russia, mostly through Bitcoin. They will accept cryptocurrency for things like virtual SIM cards, for things like VPSs, things like that. So if you can obtain cryptocurrency, you can use that to pay for a wide range of services in Russia, because even though officially it's not encouraged, it is widely used. You see that picture there, actually, I took that in November last year. I was teaching Sec 497 in Dubai, and at lunchtime I went out of the venue and I just went for a little walk around the neighborhood, and I'd gone maybe 20 yards from the hotel, and you're just surrounded by people putting flyers into your hands, trying to persuade you to buy real estate. And I ignored most of them. This group of people stood outside this little office you can see in the photo saying, got crypto, buy your property with us. And they were, you could, as long as you had cryptocurrency, you could go and buy some of the apartments that were for sale. You could buy them in Dubai, in the Netherlands, in the UAE. They accepted cryptocurrency. No surprise in that part of Dubai, and from the people I saw, from the staff that worked there, the majority of them were Russian, and they were using cryptocurrency to evade sanctions, to move their assets from Russia to Dubai and to buy property there. So although cryptocurrency is not officially encouraged, it does present you with opportunities for purchasing services in Russia, should you wish to do so. And again, you also need to be aware, when you are acquiring cryptocurrency in the West, some banks are quite hesitant to do that. So you might need to use a service, something like local Bitcoins or something like that. There are other ways to acquire cryptocurrency. So this diagram I'm going to show here is my go-to methodology for creating sock puppets in Russia at this moment. So having a SIM card, you can receive a phone call on in your home country, in my case, the UK. Obviously, it goes without saying you need to actually create your profile as well. So using the home country SIM card for receiving the calls, and we're going to use mail.ru for creating the email address. Once we have that working phone number, our profile data, and we have an email address as well, that's all we need to create an account on vk.com. VK is, or vContactor, VK is the most important Russian platform. It's very similar to Facebook. And once you're up and running on VK, you can use VK as the key to a wide range of other Russian services. Some I've highlighted. There's OK, which is another social media platform. Namebook.club, which is a fantastic people searching resource, loads of personal information in the public domain in Russia. LiveJournal, you may remember, has been around for years, still quite popular in Russia. And our YouTube is the Russian version of YouTube. Many of these and many other services will just grant you access as long as you have a VK account. So this is the process that I recommend, and that works currently for getting up and running. So that's a little bit of OPSEC. Oh, sorry, an OPSEC. I'm going to talk to you very briefly now about some of the key platforms. I've mentioned VK already. It's by far the most widely used social media platform in Russia. It looks and behaves very much like Facebook. So you have groups, you have pages, you have a wall, you share photos, comments, and likes. Visually, in terms of it looks like Facebook, it behaves an awful lot like Facebook. Main difference between VK and Facebook is the user base. Facebook in the West tends to skew a little bit older. In VK, it skews much younger, so you're under 30. The majority of the users are under 35. So bearing in mind, depending on what you're researching, what you'll find on there. OK, not to be confused with VK, is very, very similar. It started out as sort of a classmates reunited kind of a platform, but it has grown into its own standalone social network now. Again, the main difference between VK and OK in terms of demographic is that OK tends to skew a lot older. So the largest demographics are over 45. So there's an age divide between the platforms. That's something you need to consider. A little bit newer is another social media platform called Moimir, which means my world. It's part of mail.ru. So when you create your mail.ru account, you kind of get a Moimir account with that. It's a social media platform that has a very strong emphasis on these little web browser-based games that are very, very addictive that people like to play. But it does have other social media features as well. Now, yesterday, I was really, really glad to see the Telegram talk. Stephen Lerner did a fantastic talk, Telegram 101 through to 401, which he explained Telegram so well and in so much depth. I was really, really glad when I saw his talks. It meant I didn't have to describe it or go into it in any way. So if you didn't catch his talk yesterday, I strongly encourage you to catch that as soon as the video comes out. So all I'll say about Telegram, because there's nothing really much to add to Stephen's talk, but what I'll say about it is if you want to do research in Russia, you want to do research in Ukraine, Telegram is absolutely essential. So since the start of the war in Ukraine, so in February 22, 2 years ago, the Telegram user base in Russia has doubled. It's roughly 50 million users. And in Ukraine, from research I've seen, there now more people get their news about current events from Telegram than they do from the traditional news media. So if you want insights into any aspect of what's happening politically, culturally, in terms of conflict, cybercrime, and so on in the Russian environment, Telegram, and along with VK, but Telegram is absolutely essential to being able to navigate that space. Now, again, unlike Western social media, which tends to be quite locked down with its APIs and third-party tooling, that's fortunately not the case in Russia. So there are some very useful third-party tools. One of which I will mention here is called Spectator or Spevtator. Is a VK scraping platform that also combines sentiment analysis as well. So if there are particular particular pages, or they're called domains, but they're essentially pages on VK, Spectator can scrape them on an automated basis, and then it will present it will do some sentiment analysis, tell you what they're talking about, and score whether their sentiments about a particular topic are positive or negative. True to form, though, because it has been a very, very useful tool. There were some changes to VK around about the turn of this year, start of the year. So Spectator has, for me at least, is not working well currently. So it never appear with children or animals or single developer Python projects. But it is working intermittently. Fortunately, VK has a very generous API with a lot of features. So if you, rather than relying on a tool like this, if it does go down and doesn't get fixed, you can access VK's API directly and ingest quite a lot of data. Slightly different tool, which actually blew my mind first time I saw it, because it's free, doesn't require sign up, and is very, very accurate. Search for Faces is a facial recognition platform that uses data largely scraped from VK. It has more than 1 billion pictures that scraped from VK, but it also has a growing number of pictures scraped from TikTok as well. And all you need to do is to take your uploaded image, put it into search for faces, and it will find matches in those data sets for you. I found it to be very accurate. You do need to use a VPN. It doesn't like my UK IP address. I've had to use a VPN to access it. No sign-in, no payment, and it appears to be very accurate. How do they make their money? I have no idea. So tread very, very carefully. But it's if you're focusing on the Russian environment and Russian population, it's very, very effective. So these screenshots here, you can see the guy on the left appeared in the media last year on TikTok. He was a Russian soldier complaining about the conditions that the Russian soldiers had to fight in. And you can see or you may not be able to see, but he has a very bent nose, which makes him quite distinctive as someone to focus on. So I cropped the screenshot of that image from TikTok. I put it into search for faces, and it brought back this image of a guy called Sergei Moldanov. And with a 58% match, which is pretty good in terms of matching on search for faces. And it brings back all his social media that he can identify. And we can go literally from search for faces, we can go to his VK profile. And sure enough, the matching photo is actually, 11 years old, now 12 years old at the time, but it still worked. The photo you can see here on the right is a much more recent one taken in 2022. You see the impact that conflict had on him. And when he dug into his profile, you could see he wasn't a conscript. He'd actually been a professional soldier for a very, very long time. But it's a useful, and then obviously you could pivot from there to learn about his hometown, his family, his friends, and so on and so on and so on. But this was done with a completely free tool, which is very, very useful. It can be a little bit slow to work with. Another tool that's extremely useful, and we don't really have a free equivalent of, or here in the West, is one called Barkov.net. Barkov is essentially a graphical way of accessing VK's API. It's designed as a marketing tool, but as long as you have a VK account you can sign into Barkov with, you can pull back tons and tons of analytical data on pretty much anything to do with VK. So I was counting all the features it had when I was preparing this. I lost track. There were 40 or 50 different data points it could pull back from VK. It will scrape comments for you. It will tell you who's liked a particular picture. It will find users in a particular geographical area, and so on and so on. Very, very rich information. And you can access quite a lot of it on the free tier. If you do more than a certain number of queries, you'll be required to pay in rubles, which is very, very difficult, as we've seen. So you can make sparing use of the free tier to sign in, but it will pull back an awful lot of data, which allows you to analyze groups, pages, comments, friendship networks very, very quickly in a way that, frankly, is much harder to do on the main Western social media platforms. And you can see here when this is Sergei Moldanov, our soldier from the previous slide. You can see this is all the profile information that we're able to pull back about him with a quick query on Barkov. So Barkov.net, absolutely fantastic tool for accessing that. Just in closing, a couple of other resources to point you towards for working in Russia. Two of the world's biggest cybercrime forums are Russian language forums, xss.is and exploit.in. Initial access brokers sell access there, stolen data, stolen credit cards, hacking details, and so on and so on and so on. Your traditional Russian social media profiles won't do you any good on here. And be aware, obviously, that they are a Russian language, they're a Russian language forum. These sites are very well covered in the world of CTI. They're very, very well known. And if you're not aware of them, I'm just signposting these to you as a resource where you can gain great insights into what's happening in the world of criminality. And of course, you'll bump into many of your CTI researchers on there as well, I'm sure. Finally, I'm going to point you in another direction for grabbing useful data about Russia. And these are what we call grey data sources. So you might remember probably 6 years ago now, there's an incident here in the UK where 2 Russian agents traveled to the UK. They used some nerve agents to try and kill 2 Russians who were in hiding, the Skripal family. And there was a huge investigation and CCTV images were released. And Bellingcat, the open source investigative journalist organization, managed to identify the two Russians identify the two Russian agents based on passport records. And I must admit, when I first saw that, I was kind of curious as to how they did that. But it turns out the data environment in Russia is very, very leaky, either because of poor security or because of corruption. There are huge amounts of data breaches, including those from state organization, floating around, often on torrent sites and elsewhere. And anyone can now access this data, which can give you great insight into what's happening in Russia and get you access to things like passport databases, government records, recruitment databases from the Russian army, all the kind of really rich information that is hard to get any other way. The best place that I recommend to start is a website called DDoSsecrets.com, which stands for Distributed Denial of Secrets. Last time I checked, they had more than 60 databases of Russian information that you could download either from a torrent, or you could download them directly from the website as is. So that comes potentially with risks of malware, things like that. You'd want to exercise caution. But if you are researching anything to do with the Russian state, Russian agencies, there are tons and tons of organized, structured data leaks available on places like DDoS Secrets, which can be a really good place to start your research. So I hope that has been a useful introduction to the world of the Russian internet. As you can see, we're only just touching the tip of the iceberg in terms of resources and searching and so on and so on and so on. So what I'll do, if you look at the top link that I posted there to my GitHub repository, all the resources that I've mentioned in this talk are in a single document there. So take that away and that will point you to all the resources that I've mentioned. For those of you who are in Slack, I will post that link in Slack very shortly as well. But we have a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to hand back to Nico, and we'll see if I can help you with any questions or about anything that I covered.